Francisco, which is a small private equity company, entirely focused on real estate. Spent 3.5 years with them, really through the downturn. They had just raised two $500 million value-add funds. So we were really opportunistic investors during the downturn, and it was really an amazing experience getting to take advantage of all the buying opportunities that happened then. And then in 2012, I went to Cigna Realty, the real estate investment arm of Cigna Health Insurance. Spent 4 years with them, and typical of an insurance company, they were buying and building Class A product throughout the United States in most major core markets. So got to travel quite a bit with them and work on larger, more institutional level deals. In 2015, I took over Cambridge Realty Partners, which was the company my father founded in 1978. He retired, and the company really went dark in 2006. So it really was kind of a second generation startup phase, and we had all the challenges that a startup would have of kind of bringing a company back to life after that many years, almost 10 years. So that puts us at today. We're on our second value-add multifamily fund. We own about 150 apartment units in Connecticut. We've sold about 100 in the last 18 months, so we're selling more than buying. We can talk about that, but yeah, that's pretty much that.
And Pete?
Cool. So I graduated from Columbia 2008. I went down to work. Oh, well, sorry. I'll start with Stolar Capital. So Stolar Capital is a real estate investment firm. We focus on kind of ground up development and value add projects in predominantly northern New Jersey, some in New York City, some in Philadelphia. Really quick, started my career after graduating from Columbia in 2008. Went down to work for the JBG companies. 2 years in, I was a financial analyst working in the acquisitions group. 2 years in, I wanted a broader experience. Didn't want to only work in the financial models, putting it together. So on weekends, I started buying single-family homes with another financial analyst because we wanted to understand what the leasing process was like, what the actual general contracting process was like, which we really had no idea about because we were like so deep in the financial models. So we bought about 35 units in the College Park of Maryland. And in 2012, I left JBG, kind of leveraged my experience on the side on my weekend projects, leveraged my experience at JBG, and I started buying single family and small multi-unit properties kind of throughout northern Jersey. So I bought about 130 of them. We built a lot of them, a lot of construction. We found that business really difficult to scale. And so about 3-4 years ago, we transitioned into the commercial space. So we started buying larger apartment buildings, and we're starting to focus on building larger buildings.
Great. So raise your hand if you're interested in starting your own real estate company. Good. Awesome. When Pete, Nick, Fiona and I were talking about the decision to actually leave working for a firm and going to start your own thing, there's a number of things to consider, but there's 3 main things that we want to focus on today. So I think the first thing that we all agree on is that it's important to be an expert in a particular geography and a particular asset class. It's easy to get seduced to think that you can invest in multiple areas and multiple asset classes. That becomes very difficult when you're getting out and starting out on your own. Number 2 is having money. That goes without saying, but I think being a little more specific and nuanced about that is important, both on the equity side and on the debt side. And then finally, it's being able to have the skills that are necessary to execute on a deal from beginning to end. And it's pretty impossible to have every skill to execute on a development deal, but knowing what you don't know is probably as important as knowing what you do know. So we'll get right into questions. Pete, could you talk about the northern New Jersey markets that you focus on and what got you to decide to focus in those areas?
Sure, I think it was a little bit of happenstance. So I've got 3 younger brothers and a family that I'm really close to. They all live in New York City. So after DC, I moved back to New York. I tried to initially invest in Manhattan and the kind of the surrounding boroughs. Access to capital didn't really mean anything. It was unbelievably competitive. So I decided to kind of cross the river. We started investing in northern New Jersey. It was a more inefficient market. Relationships meant more because there was a lot of ambiguity, whatever you want to say, regarding the political process, regarding the zoning process. And we actually found that the yield was actually a lot higher. And so in northern New Jersey, we spent about a year and a half trying to understand where we wanted to invest. And we decided eventually to kind of pick towns along the train line to Manhattan. So it's essentially a derivative play of investing in Manhattan with slightly higher yield, probably slightly higher risk. So we invest, I don't know if you guys know New Jersey, but Chatham, Cranford, Westfield, Morristown, kind of all the train line going in, and we try to stay within half a mile of the train.
Great. And then Nick, similarly, the firm, when it was under the leadership of your father, so you had a different geography focus and a different asset focus. Could you talk about perhaps the original iteration of Cambridge and then the second iteration why you chose to change both of those things?
Yep. So Cambridge from 1978 until 2006 was predominantly office and industrial space, buying broken assets and fixing them or building from the ground up. And that was very successful for those decades that my father was running it. And then Cambridge, as I said, kind of went dark in 2006. In 2015, at that point, I had been with 3 other employers for 10 years, and I had acquired a variety of skills, to your point earlier, Atif. And basically, it was just an assessment at that point in time of where I thought the best opportunity was, 1, and 2, opportunity that I could access, kind of to Pete's point there about New York City. It was too hard for me at my young growth stage, kind of startup stage, taking over Cambridge to raise enough capital to play in core markets in big cities. The dollar amounts are just, it's too hard to do as a startup unless you have billionaire capital behind you, which you may, which is great, but if you don't and you're really syndicating capital person by person on a friends and family basis to grow, you need to identify deals that are appropriate size that you can actually transact in. So that's really how we landed in, also living in New Haven. New Haven ended up being a great starter market for us. Because Yale's located there, the stability is very strong. You've got the Yale New Haven Hospital there, which employs 30,000 people, so the stability aspect of it was totally checked. And you had really well-located apartments that were totally mismanaged, in terrible physical condition, with Yale students living there. So we started buying, at first 10-unit buildings, 20-unit buildings, and now 50-unit buildings. And what we look for is varying degree of dysfunction, either severely physically messed up and mismanaged, or at kind of the lightest end, just slightly mismanaged. But in any case, we look for a serious value-add component that we can add to the deal. And generally what we're seeing is that it's working, because New Haven hasn't been saturated with professional real estate investors yet, although that's happening now. And the returns have been really good. So it was more of an assessment of where we thought the opportunity was.
Yep.
We had limited resources personnel-wise. It was myself and then myself and an admin, and now myself, an admin, and an associate. So it's still limited resources, so we couldn't be flying to San Francisco every day. So we had to pick realistic markets that we could transact in, and realistic markets that had opportunity that we liked.
Okay, and to hone in on that a little bit more, could you talk about the property on Whitney Ave that you've put on the market recently?
Sure.
And actually, Chris, would you mind just moving to the last slide on the presentation? That's an image of the, or if I can do it. Yeah, okay. Yep, that one.
Yep. So that's a 16-unit apartment property on Whitney Avenue in New Haven, which is maybe a quarter mile from Yale Business School. We bought it in 2015. It was one of the first acquisitions we made. We bought it for $1.4 million. It had been owned by a family, a local New Haven family, for 2 generations, a very long time. They weren't real estate professionals. They were mom and pop and had other businesses, and that was just kind of a cash annuity to them. So they had no real awareness as to where the highest end of the rental market had gone if they were willing to upgrade the unit interiors. They were renting for $700 per unit on average, and we did the analysis where if we put in a certain amount of money, stainless steel kitchens, new bathrooms, general basic uplifts to the apartments, we could get 50% return on cost of those improvement dollars in these units. So we did that. We bought it. The rents were roughly $700 on average. They're roughly $1,200 on average now. We're under contract to sell it. It's a 25 IRR 3 years later. Bought it for 1.4, under contract to sell it for 2.35.
Great, so in hearing what both you and Peter said, it sounds like there is an element of looking for the right opportunity at the right growth stage that your company is at. And that's what led you to those secondary markets in New Jersey and Connecticut, where the price points and the competition's a bit lower, and allows you to kind of spread out and get going a bit faster. I think it makes a lot of sense. And then Fiona, from your perspective as a investor in new sponsors and in deals that are focusing on opportunity and value add, could you talk about your geographic focus?
So for us, geography is matters, but sometimes it doesn't matter. For us, it's like two-step work. The first step is like we screening all the class of the assets we may have trust to invest it in, and like residential, commercial, medical, maybe logistic. After review all this class of assets of investment and our risk and the return preference, we narrow down our preference to residential and commercial investment. And the second step is to find the best local developer and the local sponsor that very familiar with the local environment, the networking, and very experienced and expertise at what they are doing. And now we are focusing on Connecticut and New Jersey. And Atif here is one of our partner in New Jersey, Hoboken. So I think if we love the class assets and if we can sure that the sponsor and developer know very well about the local situation, we can work with them in anywhere nationwide.
Great, and
Yeah.
given that the economic outlook is looks challenging in the next couple of years, are there particular changes that any of the three of you will make to your geographic strategy in light of that?
For us, I think we'll like stay away from like all the big cities like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. We will move to second tier of cities. Especially we are focused on student housing, so we may look more on second tier university student housing projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Specifically to real estate, we've got interest rates rising, and we have new supply in pretty much every market. New supply was new to just the core markets coming out of the recession, but it's everywhere now.
Including New Haven as well.
Including New Haven, and obviously anyone here in Boston knows that very well. So you have new supply putting downward pressure on rents across property types, not just apartments right now, but certainly apartments at the front of that, and rising interest rates. So while we expect to continue to put out money and make acquisitions in this environment, we are doing so very cautiously. So this is an environment, in our opinion, of maybe not excess, but lots of optimism. So we are going to act countercyclically and invest with lots of caution. And conversely, in the 2009s, we like to again think countercyclically and step on the gas and invest more aggressively in those times. That has challenges as well. Raising capital in the downturns is harder. People are psychologically less willing to part with their money, but those are all that's all part of the process and part of the game. So we are cautious, and we are jumping into new markets with that caution. We would be doing so at a faster rate if the environment, if we were at a different point in the cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I think geographically, it's not making a huge difference. I think anything, if things go south, there generally is a flight to quality to better areas. So I think you probably want to stay in better areas, again, near train stations. And I think for us, it's probably more asset focused. I think we are focused on kind of repositioning predominantly residential assets, because when I think residential rents, I think have much more resiliency to a downturn. So I mean, if you can go in, if you can reposition the asset like Nick was talking about, bump rents up, 30-40%, even if rents come down, I mean, you're still at a really, really comfortable position as long as you fix your debt for a long period of time. I think we talked about it yesterday. I think one of the bigger problems in 2008 was there was a serious liquidity crisis. So even though the property values were okay, when the financing came due, they just couldn't get a loan to either extend that loan or get a new loan to take that loan's place, and obviously refinance. And so what we've been very cognizant of is trying to get 10-year money, or on our development project is we're actually paying a premium at the back end, where if we are in a terrible spot, the bank will have to extend that loan for another 5 years.
So you have an interesting previous experience in terms of the asset class that you focused on. So right now you're focusing on multifamily, and beforehand you had gone guns blazing on single-family homes. Could you talk about your experience there and any lessons that you took away as you transitioned to multifamily?
Yeah, I mean, in the single-family space, well, one, it's an extremely difficult business to scale. I mean, you can buy 130 homes. The absolute dollars is still not is still not that substantial, and it's a lot of work. And so, the construction management, the property management, the people that we had working with us. I mean, if you were a good property manager, you're not going to be property managing single-family homes. If you're a good contractor, you're not going to be working on small homes. And so we were kind of working with subpar folks. I think we also went kind of guns blazing by ourselves in a market that we didn't, or in a business that we didn't know all that well. And so when I went to the multifamily space, we did fine. We sold off the majority of those assets. When I went to the multifamily space, we had a real focus to joint venture with other partners, especially in the beginning. You joint venture with other partners that really understand the business. You give them more upside, drastically reduce your risk. You understand the business from them, you protect your investment, and then we started to do a lot of multifamily investing by ourselves after we got comfortable. Because there was a time in the very beginning of the single-family space where I think we took a decision where I almost lost the business because we didn't really know what we were doing. We were kind of going 1,000 miles an hour, and we made some really, really serious mistakes. And none of that would have happened if I just went slower. I wasn't as greedy, or I wasn't as ambitious as I was. I partnered with really good people that had a ton of experience in that space. So.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. Similarly to Nick and to Pete, my geographic focus is very tight. It's in just 3 cities, Hoboken, Jersey City, and Newark. And I work on smaller projects that are dominantly about $2 to $4 million. So I'll actually show you a couple images of one of my projects right there. So this is a renovation of a really beautiful townhouse from the 1890s in Hoboken in New Jersey. I had a couple of pretty gaudy renovations and have been chopped up into apartments. So this is an acquisition for $2 million, which is about $500,000 below market because of a distressed seller that needed to sell quickly. I'll be putting about $1 million of work in this, and we're aiming to sell for about $4.3 million. So it works out to a 1.4 equity multiple. For a renovation project, that's very, very good. So this is the dominant type of project that I like to work on. For me, I like the historic, within the multifamily and the condominium asset class, historic particularly, because cities like Hoboken, Jersey City, and Newark have a huge amount of historic assets. For example, the city of Hoboken is 55,000 people, and about 70% of the buildings are considered local, state, or federal level historic buildings. In that specific area, I tend to have less competition because developers that are a bit larger than me don't necessarily want to waste time on historic buildings because there's so much involved in structurally, architecturally, and then zoning and code-wise to get those buildings ready for being leased and sold. So that's the particular niche that I focus on, and also because I'm a licensed architect, there's a kind of an affinity that I have with that type of stuff as well. So I think for that first topic, in terms of having a significant amount of knowledge in a geography and an asset class, I think you can see with all 4 of us, there's a strong amount of similarities where it's this idea of having a focus on what you're doing. I think the second one is a critically important one as well, which is being able to have money to actually start out. So Nick, could you talk about the type of investors that you have and how that's changed over the course of Cambridge Realty Part 1 and Part 2?
Sure. So Cambridge Realty 1 started the same way Cambridge Realty 2, and I say that too is kind of when I took it over in 2015 and in 1978 when my dad started it. That would be the one. He started the same way as I am now, with friends and family, doing one deal at a time and kind of snowballing, building a portfolio, returning money plus profit to people, proving concept, proving ability, and that natural snowball effect starts to happen once you start making money for people. Same thing I'm doing right now, friends and family investors. We have 25 active current investors. That's up from 19 on the first fund that we raised 3 years ago. So that snowball effect, you can see it is happening. And it helps that the economy is doing as well as it is. People are looking to invest, which is a little bit of a catch-22. Is when there's a lot of money in the economy and people are really looking to invest, it also means that prices are pretty high in real estate and elsewhere. So that's one challenge, but that's part of the process. It's part of the business that we're in, and we work through those challenges.
Okay, and then Pete, could you talk about the investors that you currently have and how you're able to source them?
Sure. I mean, similar story to Nick. I mean, the first couple, it was friends and family, and then it was proof of concept, or at least the beginning as we ramped up. It was, hey, look what we're doing, look what we're about to do, and try to tell a story and continue to get investors that are outside friends and family. One example, and we look for active partners that not only understand the business, that not only can be a sounding board for us in difficult situations, but can also help us make a lot of introductions that are going to help my business in the future.
It's like a network effect.
So yeah, so in Chatham, we bought one building in Chatham. It's about a block from the train. It's 31 apartments, and we had one or two investors that wanted to invest the entire thing. They were really excited about it. I said no, and we ended up getting 11 investors because I wanted to make 11 people really happy, and that spun out to once I gave them back their refinance check, which I gave them back almost all of their money, I also asked for a lunch or a dinner, got in front of them and said, listen, we're looking to do X, Y, and Z. Can you make a couple of introductions? And I ended up meeting 30, 40 people from that. And they're also investing in some other deals. And then it's as Nick was saying, it is a little bit of a snowball effect once you do prove the concept.
So now this gets interesting. From the other perspective of an investor, Fiona, could you talk about what you look for in young sponsors?
Yeah, so for young sponsors we work always here, there are a couple of things that in US we work not only with young sponsors, we also work with some mid-sized developers as well. So for young sponsors, you have to know there's something that from mid-sized developers, there are several things you can compete with. Like their cost of finance is really, really cheap. They can get loans from AIG or like Citizen Bank. This is cheaper than the cost of your money. The second thing is they don't need your money from the very first step. They can use their own money for pre-development. And when your money in, the development can start take off. So there's really shorten the time of the investment. And the third part is that they really have a strong backup team to execute their ideas. So for young sponsors, if you cannot compete with these three aspects, then the question is like, what else can you provide with? Like from our partnership with Atif, there are several things that Atif can provide.
This was a very self-serving question.
Yeah. So for example, like he's very, very familiar with Hoboken, like where he grew up. So he has a sense of a community, which is we cannot see it from the mid-sized developers because the mid-sized developers go where the deals are. And the second part is that he can always find that really interesting ideas and very interesting projects. And that's what we are looking for. And we also want to build relationships with young developers and young sponsors from very beginning of the process. So it's very, very important. But on the other hand, we also connect ourselves with other institutions, investors from China. I totally agree with Peter. We have our own fund here in the US, but we want to co-invest into some deals with some Chinese institution investors because we want to let them to know what's the market in here and let them understand the market, understand the culture because it's totally different. And through this partnership and co-investment, we can build like more strong partnership in the future.
Okay, so it sounds like the two sides of that relationship, from the perspective of a sponsor looking for an investor, it's someone that is flexible, has an eye towards growth as you grow your company. And then from the investor looking for a sponsor perspective, it's particularly someone that's creative, that can come up with interesting solutions, and looks at the broader perspective, but also very detailed perspective on an asset. That's great. And now on the other side, so Fiona, you had mentioned debt as a part of the investment equation. So I'll start with Pete. Could you talk about the different types of debt that you look at for a particular property, recourse versus non-recourse, and where those loans come from, and particular advantages or disadvantages of either?
Sure. I'm sure you guys all know the difference between non-recourse and recourse debt. Recourse debt is when you personally sign the loan. Non-recourse debt is when you don't have to sign the loan. Obviously, recourse debt is a lot cheaper. Whether or not you get recourse or non-recourse debt, you still have to sign on the bad boy or bad girl, correcting yesterday, carve-outs. And so, I mean, so you can't force the company into bankruptcy, and you can't commit fraud, essentially. But you still need a certain net worth to be able to get really any loan. And so we've strategically partnered with a couple of folks, whether they're family offices, high net worth individuals, whenever we've gone out and gotten financing. You know, it's not, and again, we've partnered with people who not only can sign the loan, but they can also provide maybe the property management. Maybe it's expertise in or relationships with local banks, or they can make introductions for us. It's not only the size of their balance sheet that we look for, and we need partners. We need partners to get loans, because I can't sign on these things myself, at least not for the larger projects. And what else? Did you have any other questions besides non-recourse, recourse?
Yeah, I think you hit on them. A few things just to get a little more in the weeds. So give us a gauge of what sort of fee someone would ask for in order to guarantee a loan with you, and how does that work?
Yeah, I think it's different. So we've got a larger development project in Morristown, which
That's the one that's
maybe down there.
Yeah.
So we got so it's the brick building. It's about 80,000 square feet. It's the middle of construction right now, and we got a loan from a local bank for a little over $20 million, and we're paying a high net worth guy who's also my partner about 1.25%. So we're paying about a $250,000 guarantee fee, but he is signing recourse. He's signing recourse, so all of a sudden the loan is, I think it's LIBOR plus 255. So I think LIBOR is 230, so 485, 490. I think non-recourse you're looking at 7.5. So even on the difference in just the interest rate alone, the project is saving money. And then I couldn't even get non-recourse debt because I can't sign on the bad boy or bad girl carve-outs. And we went to a local bank. I mean, I think with small projects like this is about a $30 or $32 million project. There aren't a lot of large bulge bracket banks that are very interested. And if they are interested, I don't think the rate is competitive to the local banks. So we look at provident investors, which are 10 to $25 billion banks. When we look at, I mean, they are much more competitive on rate because they know these areas on a street-by-street basis, whereas a commercial bank like Chase would basically just look at kind of the broad strokes of the deal, and they'll need more profit to come.
Yeah, and to add a little bit more color to that, national banks like Bank of America, Deutsche Bank, and Wells are like the ones that provided loans for my projects when I worked at Xtel. Really no interest on deals like these just because it's a little too much brain damage, especially historic repositionings and infill projects to make sense for them. So it's definitely regional lenders that will be the ones that are doing the recourse style debt. There are some banks that will offer non-recourse loans, but those are banks that are looking to aggressively grow in a particular geography. And those are few and far between. On the side that is non-recourse, that's something that Pete had mentioned as well, at a much higher interest rate. Those are typically private lenders, high net worths, family offices that are looking for 7, 8, 9% return on their money, but they can close much faster, which is a very important aspect. So for example, banks that will offer recourse debt will take anywhere from 60 to, I've had experience of 120, 150 days to close. And you can very easily lose deals in competitive markets because of that. So non-recourse lenders can typically close anywhere from 10 to 20 days. So when you think about that, the advantages and the disadvantages of both, one smart strategy is to focus on having private lenders for the acquisition of the asset, and then once you have site control, concurrently start that process to get the recourse loan. That way you're able to go down to a much lower interest rate, but then not lose the project because of the timing issue. Nick, could you talk about the different banks that you work with on your projects?
Sure, yeah. So I think you guys were speaking mostly to development there, because the non-recourse debt on development is much more expensive than the recourse. But on our strategy value, but when we're buying existing buildings that just need some love, the non-recourse lenders love that strategy. So we're borrowing almost exclusively non-recourse, which is great. Means if the economy goes down, rents and occupancy at the building go down, and the cash flow at the building can't service the debt anymore, the lender obviously can foreclose on the building, but they can't come after you. They can't take your house, they can't take your car. If you sign a recourse loan, they can come after you personally. So that is the difference. So we are borrowing frequently from the agencies, Fannie and Freddie, which
And
is
by agency, you mean federal government agencies?
federal government agencies, yep. Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are the primary ones we use, and the primary ones in general. They love apartments. They have a mandate to put out however many billions of dollars a year into residential projects. They love value add. And their rates are very, very competitive. Their loan sizes are very competitive. They're non-recourse. They have some downsides. They take forever to close. You're working with the government. They don't move too quickly. But
And forever, you mean like 6 months, a year?
forever, yeah.
5 years, 10
We're
years?
still waiting. We haven't
You sold
yet
the
closed.
project and now you get the debt. Got it,
No,
okay.
4 months.
4 months.
5 months maybe, yeah. You know, the person on the other end of the line, as opposed to working with a local bank that may be strategic and very business oriented, the agencies, the person on the other end of the phone is oftentimes, you know, you're a drop in the bucket. They don't really care. So those are the downsides to it. But we use the banks as well on more complicated projects. Certainly any construction projects will go to local regional banks.
Terrific. And then Fiona, from the investor's perspective, could you say how you would look at a young sponsor if they choose or are required to bring on a JV partner because of the commercial loan guarantee issue? Is that a positive, is that a negative, or is that a neutral?
Oh, totally positive, because as equity investor, we will never sign a loan or be the guarantor, that is for sure. So as young sponsor or young developer, you can source a deal by yourself, you can find an equity investor, you can design a very good design and get a very good a return. But one thing you cannot get is if you don't have track record and if you don't have money support you, you cannot get a loan. So it's very important to find a JV partner that has a very good track record to help you with that, and come with all this together, you can get a deal to go up. So it's totally positive to get a JV partner.
Great. I think on that note, for all of my deals, although they're relatively small, of $2 to $4 million, I have a joint venture partner, the Hanini Group, based in Newark, New Jersey, and they have done deals of a similar style, but up to about $25 million. And I think for me, there's the strategic purpose of the commercial loan guarantee, as well as their in-house design team, construction team, property management team, accounting, legal, which helps me then be able to focus on finding deals and raising money, which is two very important skill sets as opposed to everything else that's required to get a deal done. So I think that's actually a good transition into the last category that we wanted to emphasize today, which is about the skills that you need to execute on a deal from beginning to end. Pete, could you talk about the people that are on your team and the different skills that they have in the process of a development deal?
Sure. So I've got 2 partners. This is 5 full-time, and it ranges from 5 to 7 to maybe 8, depending on how many interns we have. So I started the business with one of my best friends. I feel like real estate in general is a pretty simple business, and I feel like trust is one of the most important things that you can start a relationship off with. He also is much better on the accounting side. He's a much better writer, does all the investment memos, all the quarterly updates, all the investor relations. I'm much more people-oriented. I'm speaking with brokers, finding deals. We brought on our 3rd partner, who was a friend of mine at JBG before we went to business school, Warden, and they worked Related for a couple of years. And he is very much in the weeds. He goes through every line item loan docs, every term sheet, every LOI, every general contract that we sign. It's always good to have somebody that's really smart, that is so attentive to detail oriented. Then we've got 1 financial analyst, and we have 1 in-house construction guy that oversees all of our construction projects.
And amongst those different people that are either your partners or your staff, could you talk about some of the personality traits that you personally, as the one that's driving the ship, is looking for in all those people that are on your team?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a small firm like ours, we don't have really any checks and balances, so again, it kind of goes back to trust. Also, it goes back to accountability. I mean, if I can send an email out and just expect it to be done, and not save it, and make sure that it gets done, that is one of the most important things. And then I would probably say taking the initiative. We're looking for people that want to go out and again, start their own thing. I mean, one of the ways that we reduce costs is we keep salaries low, but we help them start businesses and we help them bring in revenue. So for example, my construction guy, I sat down with him, I helped him start a GC business, so which he gets 50% of. And so when he's not busy, because he's really busy renovating anywhere between 10 and 40 apartments for me, he's doing that for third parties. He's doing a lot of kitchens and baths, building homes for other people. He gets 50% of that business. Our business gets 50% of the business. The 50% of whatever we bring in actually just pays for his salary, and he's happy because he's out there and he's making more money and incentives are aligned. I mean, it's the same thing with our analyst, who's really not an analyst anymore, he's been with us for 12 years. We started a consulting business, and he drives the process on doing a lot of the financial models and investment models for third parties. He's working with a lot of family offices, he's working with a lot of small private equity firms, and he's bringing in a fair amount of money, and he gets a third of that business. And so taking the initiative, like both of these guys have an unbelievable initiative to be able to I don't do anything with those businesses. I get to reap some of the rewards for having the idea of kind of helping them start it. But it was really their initiative that kind of drove and keeps on driving that process.
So this idea of cash flows is something that I think is really interesting what you said. So when you make that transition from working for JBG or Cigna or Xtel and getting a paycheck every 2 weeks to then being the manager of your own destiny in terms of your cash flows, I think it's really interesting, the idea of having multiple cash flows that come in to help balance the fact that your costs will remain relatively constant, but then your incomes are going to be very lumpy as opposed to that also being constant. On the other side, are there certain ways that you've been able to really manage your expenses and keep those in check as you've been growing as a company?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has to have a long-term focus, and everybody has to be willing to sacrifice today for hopefully this business gets better, and everybody is in the understanding that if the business does get better, everybody will participate. I've given a lot of folks equity. If things do well, the equity will be worth something. If things don't go well, then it won't be worth anything. And so keeping costs down with the hope of actually giving them real upside, I think is important. And then fees. Fees is huge, whether it's consulting fees. I became a broker when I had 130 homes, not to sell homes because I didn't want to spend my time running around, but I found a way to get referral fees. So I said, listen, you can sell all of my 130 homes, but I want 30% of your fee. And I said, fine. So we got a fair amount of brokerage fees, and then it's a lot of construction management fees, whether it's on our projects, we're hiring the subs, or whether it's on third-party projects where it's under this separate entity. But you need a constant source of revenue, especially as things are unbelievably competitive today. I mean, you guys probably know just as well as I do. There's so much capital in so many of these markets, and it's hard to really it's hard to scale. I mean, it's not easy. And so, while you're not earning acquisition fees and promote dollars down the road, there has to be a real focus on keeping the company alive. And it's easier to keep the company alive if you keep expenses and overhead down. I mean, we worked out of my apartment for the first 2 years.
How many people in that apartment?
Yeah, there was 13. There was 13 of us. It's funny. It was 13 and my dog.
New York City apartment.
And my dog. It was a 180-pound mastiff.
Who counts as
Yeah, it was basically.
It's actually bigger than me.
Yeah,
So.
oh yeah. It's my size. So my wife would come home and she's like, it's 13 people, it's a freaking mastiff, this dog walking around, it's dirty. We've come a little ways from it.
Okay. So Nick, given that you have a very lean operation, could you talk about what skills in the development life cycle you feel you're strongest at, and where you have complemented that with either an employee or an outsourced consultant?
Sure, absolutely. I think my strongest skill set is financial underwriting, and I don't think that was really a natural strength before I went to work with my first job out of college at East Hill Secured. But that was the classic investment banking structure with long hours and an analyst team that you were a part of, and you just ate and lived the numbers, and it built those skills for those years. And that stayed with me, and that's a day-to-day thing that I lean on and rely on. As far as keeping lean in-house, that's very deliberate. To the problem that you've addressed here, starting your own company in this industry.
And the cash flows issue.
Yeah, absolutely. We generate some fees, but those fees really just keep the lights on. And with we only have 2 employees other than me, and those fees barely cover the office rent, miscellaneous expenses, and payroll. So it's very lean. So you really have to kind of understand how the fees are structured, where they come from, because the goal is to get the profit sharing windfall at the end of these projects. That's really where your real estate investors, for the most part, make the majority of their money. So the fees, you have to budget for it correctly and plan for it correctly, and then really bunker down, which is a weird experience. You're raising millions of dollars for projects and you're eating ramen noodles. So it's
About 3 or 4 ramen noodles a year repeat, right?
Yeah. So you have to plan for that and be aware of what you're going into as you're setting out, and have the skills and experience to understand how long it's going to take you to get where you're going to get, assuming things go okay or better than okay. And if you never want to plan for the worst case scenario, but hopefully that doesn't happen. And if you only focus on that, you'll never do anything. So you got to have some optimism.
Okay. And then Fiona, as the U.S. arm of a very, very large Chinese company, as you are staffing up and growing your team in the United States, what skills and what talent types are you looking for as you grow?
So I think the first thing is like you have to be very, very self-motivated, because our office is running here independently. So you need to know it's still a small company and a small team. So you need to self-motivate it, and you need to catch up all the knowledge and the skills that you need to learn in this industry. And also we love the people that they know if they work for what they need to work with a small team or like a small office. You have to networking. You have to do everything that you can do to make this company or make this team to work and to grow in the future. Because compared with working in a very big corporation, in a small team, we have your interests aligned with us. So when we grow, you grow as well. And there's one thing I want to mention, that because for part of our equity, we want to invest it to work with young and new sponsor and developer. We are very aware that's the situation Peter mentioned, that at very start, there's so many things you have to concern about. So in the next year, we start to cut some of our office space that's only for the new and young sponsor and developer we work with, so they don't have to worry about like the office expense or like the working space, and can only focus on the deal with partner or work together. I think it's a very good point.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And your office is in Midtown, right?
At Midtown, 44th and Lexington Avenue. It's right besides the Penn Station.
That's a great location.
Is Penn Station?
Grand Central.
Grand Central.
It's a better
yeah.
one, too.
Yeah.
So, okay, and now the really fun stuff: legal, accounting, finance, all of that. So there's a lot of lawyers involved in any real estate deal. Pete, could you talk about the different types of lawyers that are involved in a deal, and like say 1 or 2 characteristics that you found in the lawyers that you like to keep and give more and more work to?
Sure, you didn't ask me this question.
It's a new one.
Yeah, I mean, this is not an area of the business that I focus on much. This kind of goes under my partner's hat. But you do have lawyers that specialize in certain things. You've got transaction lawyers, you've got closing attorneys, you've got lawyers that specialize in joint venture agreements, you've got lawyers that specialize in the environmental space. We focus on working with, well, we actually work with, for the majority of our legal, we work with actually one general counsel firm that focuses on working with actually small businesses. And so we pay them a set fee every month, and we can give them an unlimited amount of work, so we don't feel like we're picking the phone and we're kind of getting nickel and dimed every time. And they put together all of the mundane stuff. Again, operating agreements, JV agreements. Whenever it gets really complicated, or if it's land use law, we'll pay a little more for local attorney, local knowledge, local relationships, which is really important. Or if there's a really big legal issue, we may have to get a litigator involved and actually pay him some more money to kind of protect our downside, but that's how we think about it.
Okay, so it sounds like the lawyers that you like to keep are ones that have your interests aligned and realize that you aren't an ATM for their fees.
Yeah, and it's a long-term outlook. I mean, I think it all goes back, especially me, with kind of long-term relationships. You know, we kind of preach that we're going to grow and we're going to grow with them, and so to kind of keep our costs down now, and we'll be loyal as we grow and give them more business.
Okay. So, Nick, can you help us understand, with all these different terms like partnership, limited liability company, corporation, and 100 other terms, what are the legal entities and the tax entities that are involved in a real estate transaction?
So generally speaking, real estate is closed into a limited liability corporation, an LLC, and that limits your liability. Essentially, if the project goes bankrupt, if the cash flow of the property is insufficient to service the debt and the lender forecloses on you, or more specifically, more pointedly, if there's a slip and fall at a property, if you own an apartment building or an office building and someone slips on your property, hurts themselves, sues you, the only entity that they can sue is the ownership entity, which is XYZ LLC. It's not you personally. So that's typically how real estate is closed and operated, regardless of the funding structure, whether it's a private equity fund buying it or a pension fund or whatever. And that's what we do as well. Yeah, that's the summary of it.
And then under that limited liability corporation, say for 550 Whitney Ave LLC, what is the relationship between you as the general partner and the limited partners? Are each of them separate LLCs underneath that LLC, or how does that work?
Yeah, so you have the ownership LLC. In that case of the property we did, it was 550 Whitney Avenue LLC or something like that. And then we had our fund, our private equity fund, below that, which was the single member of the ownership LLC. And then each individual investor in the fund is a member of the fund LLC. So you get a couple layers
So
of
grandparent, a parent, and child LLC.
Exactly, right. So you have circle ownership with no humans in it, and then you have an ownership LLC, which is a collection of humans,
Yep.
and then individual members that are all individually members of that
Okay.
collection.
And then in terms of taxation, who is responsible for the tax? Is it a grandparent, the parent, or the child?
For property gains taxes or property tax?
So it would be either property gains in the forms of capital gains
Mhm.
at a sale, or your annual income tax obligations for the profit from the operations.
Yep, so in our case, we're set up as a private equity company, so we are a pass-through entity, which has gotten a lot of press in the last couple of years with the tax law changes. So tax responsibility, liability gets passed through to our investors. So when we sell a property and there's a profit, the property gains tax are all passed through the ownership entity, which is our corporation, our company. And each individual investor gets a tax form from us at the end of the year that shows their percentage interest of ownership of it and their percentage interest of the tax bill.
Okay. And then Fiona, from the investor's perspective, is there anything else that you would like to add in terms of like legal structures and how you invest in a vehicle?
I think it's pretty much the same because we as an investor, we register as a LLC and we invest into another LLC. And so it's basically the same as Nick said. But we are a little bit different is that we set up a partnership structure above all this LLC to shield our risk between here in United States and our parent company in China. So my advice is that two things is really important. Things is that to get a very good attorney to save money on that because attorney help you to shield the risk from you and all of your investment and to protect you. And also you need a very good accountant, not very good, just CPA is fine, that she or he can help you plan the tax because tax is really important. You have to make sure that you don't pay extra money on tax, so it's really important things, yeah.
And just to give you a kind of a corollary, is even though that you should have experts on your team that know the legal and the accounting very well, it's important for you as a sponsor to know all of that as well and not necessarily breeze through. So for example, for me, what I did, I had seen a lot of operating agreements when, and worked on a lot of operating agreements when I worked at Extel. So what I had done for my projects is essentially rewrite an operating agreement from scratch. So literally a blank Word document, what is it that I would want to have in my documents? So I worked at Extel for 3 years, and the last year at Extel I was quite checked out in terms of doing my own deals. So in that context, I had written this whole thing on the weekends, and finally when I showed it to my lawyer for the first deal, he's like, yeah, no. But I think the whole process of doing it was useful because I know all of the ins and outs of what goes into an operating agreement, and I can speak intelligently about it, which, especially if you're extremely lean operation, then it's important to have that grasp.
We're running low on time. He's our timekeeper.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
It's been 55 minutes.
55? I think that's it for me now. So now it's up to you guys. Questions either for all of us, one of us, two of us, please.
You talked a little bit about the money side of things, and I was wondering about personal liquidity. How relative to the size of deals that a founder would like to pursue after they form their own company, what kind of personal liquidity or net worth do you recommend?
I'll jump in there. So there's two aspects to that typically, what I've found. So any loans that you get, the lenders require you to have a certain net worth and liquidity in order to qualify for the size of their loan, which is typically around 10% liquidity, 10% of the size of the loan. Pete talked about ways, if you don't have that, to mitigate that, get around it. And then as far as investing alongside of your investors, 100% of the time, if you are starting a company or you're running a major real estate investment company, your investors will require you to put in some co-investment alongside of them. 5% I would say is very lean. I've seen sponsors put in as much as 20%, so I think that range typically, and there are obviously exceptions, but 5 to 20% of the required equity to get the deal done, the sponsor should expect to invest. And you know, you can syndicate that though. If you don't have it when you're starting, you can have friends and family syndicate that, and that becomes your sponsorship equity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question. I think 5 to 20%, seems right. We try to co-invest between 10 and 20% in all of our deals. But to what Nick said, if you don't have the money, you can actually raise that money from family and friends. I think what at least our limited partners look for is that you have real skin in the game. So if you're worth if you're worth $1 million and you're putting in $200,000, like that's very, very meaningful. But if you have like $1 billion and you're putting in $500,000, like obviously you don't really care. I think sponsors want to see, or limited partners want to see a dollar amount that is really meaningful, because I think it's just human nature that you're going to care about the investment more. But you can co-invest, you can raise that money, but I think it's important that you put at least some of your money in every deal.
My question is about the first investment you make. So you mentioned you need to raise money from friends and family, and assuming like you don't want to lose your own money, but it's okay losing your own money, but in your first deal you may actually put other people's money at risk, and they're the closest people to you. How confident do you need to feel to pull the trigger? Like my thoughts are always like, how do you know you're not going to make a mistake on your first deal?
I'm happy to do that one. So for the project that I showed you the image of, the townhouse deal in Hoboken, this was this one. So this was $1 million of equity, and 2/3 of that came from a family office, and the grandson is a friend of mine, and then the remaining amount came from my friend Jonathan and my uncle Irfan. So it is extremely important to me that I underwrote that very, very clearly and very well and very conservatively. The reason being that I go to my cousin's birthday party. I was over in Michigan. We celebrate New Year's with my uncle, and that just cannot go wrong. And I think you have to be extremely cautious and engaged. Like my two current projects are my two first projects. That's it. So the deal that's I'm doing with Fiona, which is a 7-unit multifamily in Hoboken, and this one. And when I look at my archive folder of deals that I looked at and passed on, 80 deals that I looked at, and maybe plus or minus seriously underwritten, but 80 deals in Hoboken, Jersey City, and Newark to find these first two. that I thought were very, 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 very good and had a very, very high likelihood of success.
Along with, the risks of doing everything else, as far as renovation jobs and construction, how did you guys know on the first projects, like how to budget that out, and kind of what kind of resources you use to make those underwriting decisions?
Yeah, I didn't. So when I said one of the biggest mistakes I made early on was
It's good to be honest. It's good.
that we hired general contractors that we thought were doing a good job, and they didn't do a good job. They weren't pulling permits. I think we had 80 construction projects going on at the same time, and I think for 25 of those jobs we gave it to about 3 general contractors, and they did a terrible job. They didn't pull permits. They were doing everything illegally. We kind of found out later on. Our budget doubled, things hit the wall pretty hard, to your point. And I think it kind of goes back to my earlier point. I think you should be partnering with folks that have a lot of experience with construction. I think you should be partnering with people that have done this before. I think underselling and over-delivering is really important, especially for your first couple of deals. If you think you're gonna rent out apartments for $1,900, tell them it's $1,700 and show them a 12% IRR, when it may be a 16% IRR, because if it comes in at 13, they're gonna be ecstatic. If you show them 16 and you give them 13, they're gonna be really disappointed. So try to get people to invest at a really low level and partner with people that have a lot of experience, and then add some cushion, and then see if you
Do you
can.
feel like you can still learn if you're partnering with people and they take over? I think that's.
Yeah, you gotta be, I think you have to be really involved. It's not, you don't just hand them the project, but if you're really involved, you're on the phone with them every other day, you're at these properties, you're kind of seeing who they work with, how they structure agreements. That's how we started to become successful, because in the beginning, we just trusted way too many people, and it was a disaster. I can't tell you.
I think to speak to that point, I come from quite a different background because I'm a licensed architect and work in construction, so a lot of that's second nature to me, but I've been thinking really consciously about that because I have an intern associate that's starting on Monday, and he doesn't have any design and construction experience. So what my plan is to do is, he's a smart guy though, is have him very logically look through what are the buckets of costs associated with a property. So we'll walk through a townhouse together and have him literally just start writing down, there's any money that has to be allocated to this, to this, to this, and start taking the next step. And okay, so in the category of MEP, what's involved in the MEP? And write all those things down. Like, oh, a boiler, so do you fix the boiler, do you replace the boiler, how much does it cost? And start going down line by line by line by line, and developing a budget rather than from the perspective of an architect or a builder, from the perspective of just a logical person. And I think that's something that's underlying a lot of the complementing of skills that you may or may not have.
That's the first step in the whole feasibility. The feasibility process is what we're talking about here. You put the budget together and then you tie that into a pro forma when you're looking at a deal before you go under contract to decide whether you like it, whether you think it's a good opportunity. And to Atif's point, very basic on a development. The land costs, or if you're buying and renovating a building, the building costs, your hard costs, how much is it going to cost to bang nails and put wood in, and then your soft costs, how much will the architect cost and your legal and everything else. Those are the 3 buckets, and then within them there's tons of details. And go to work for the best company you can for a couple of years, and they'll teach you how to do that really well. You put that together, and then you can get under contract to buy this, and then really start determining that those numbers are valid, or that you made a mistake and that you're going to blow those numbers, and you can back out of the deal before you lose money. You get money down, non-refundable. I just want to touch on the first question a little bit too, about comfort level going into a deal. One of the best pieces of advice I got before going off on my own was don't lose money. It was stern, there was some humor in it though, but it was, in real estate, unlike private equity or venture capital, where losses are a more normal part of those businesses, real estate typically is income producing, short of a massive correction like 2009. You shouldn't have to lose money. You may have some bad deals, but in differentiating your mindset between investors' money and your own, you should have no different. Losing investors' money should keep you up at night as much as it would your own, if not more. Because if you lose their money, they won't re-up with you, and your momentum will stop, and that means you're not going to make any money, and you've also let some important people down. So you got to take it super seriously and don't lose it. And the way to not lose it is to acquire the skills to assess the risk at a really high level and learn from some really smart people for a couple of years to do that.
Thanks.
So obviously you guys mentioned there's a ton of capital flowing into these different markets, a lot of people chasing deals. How are you able to actually curate opportunities? Are you just exclusively going through brokers who oftentimes are peddling deals 10 to 20% above market? How are you actually able to find valuable deals to invest in?
You want to take it? Amir?
I'll take it. So I think for me, I don't think you should discount any of those online or public resources. I think similar to Pete, I'm a sales agent as well, so I have access to the MLS, and there's definitely deals there that don't show up on Zillow and Truly and other more retail listings. Besides that, touching on what Fiona said earlier, I'm a city planning commissioner in Hoboken. I'm a trustee of a private school there and a teen shelter in Jersey City. So I'm really plugged in. Like I know a lot of people that own land, own buildings, operate, and from that, because I have 2 projects that are quite nice, that are really nice parts of Hoboken, that has helped it be the situation that brokers will come to me with the deal. So there's one project at 10th and Willow in Hoboken that Joe will talk to you about later too. So, but that one's a great deal. It's in a particular market where, a particular part of Hoboken where our recent change in our city planning has made that land extremely valuable. So I think being knowledgeable about all the different issues at play and knowing where to go and who to talk to is something that is irreplaceable and just takes a lot of time and a lot of just effort of being in a particular place. And the last one that I think is really, hasn't borne fruit yet, but I think is a very long-term strategy, is on Saturday mornings I walk around Hoboken, Jersey City, Newark with a notepad and my phone. I have the Property Shark app up. And anytime I see broken lintels or peeling paint on these townhouse type projects, I do the research to see who they are, where they're from, do some Google stalking, and then the next week I go back and knock on the door, and it sometimes takes a while to get someone to open the door, but then just say, hey, and this message I've A/B tested a few times, but I usually say, hi, I'm an architect and I'm purchasing the building a few blocks down from you. I was just interested, have you ever thought of selling your building? And to come across in that sort of non-offensive approach, as opposed to saying that I'm a developer, I'm looking to make a lot of money on your building, or I'm an agent looking to make money to sell to somebody else. I think that I've done that 100 times on deals where I've knocked on doors, probably got people to open the door 20 times, and of those 20, maybe 10 were interesting, but 2 are actual conversations that I'm having, like legitimate conversations with somebody about a deal. So if you have time, like we have time, I kind of like doing it. So.
Yeah, I think for us, it's a really good question, and it's something that we encounter every day. It's frankly a problem, but we don't buy things from brokers. Usually, when things get bidded out properly, prices get bid up, and basically it's a cost of capital game. So we speak with brokers that we've got good relationships with, and we will basically go through tax records and say, we want this property at this price. Go speak to this owner. We don't have. Maybe we should spend more time. I'd rather the broker spend the time. I say, listen, I'll give you a 4% commission. This is what we want to pay for these 50 addresses. Go knock on these doors, go find these guys, go figure it out. And then it's building, and for sites that you really want, it's you yourself. Once the broker kind of gets you in the door, and once you get in the door yourself, all of our deals are off market, which is why we're in New Jersey, not New York. I was in Massey Knackel's office in New York a couple years ago, and I walked around the room and I was touring with a senior guy there, and he said, every person has a couple block radius in New York City, and they're calling each and every owner a couple of times a week. So there's no such thing as off market in New York City, and it's an extremely efficient market. In New Jersey, that doesn't exist. In New Jersey, you can knock on somebody's door and say, hey, what do you think about selling your property? Or what do you think about contributing your property and you take a promote? What do you think about repositioning this asset? This is, we're trying to develop 200 student housing beds, 3 blocks from the train in South Orange. Right now, it's an auto body shop. So I actually, personally, I didn't use a broker. I knocked on the guy's door. I said, listen, I'll give you a couple $1 million, and I'll give you a capital account, and I'll earn a 40 over a 7, which is pretty egregious, but the number I gave in front was really attractive. And he said, absolutely. So I have a free option for 2 years to get it rezoned, so I can build 200 student housing beds for Seton Hall, and it'll be a home run project. But it's not, there's no easy answer. It's a really good question. It's really hard.
I think tying to what Pete said, there's important ways to make people your allies. And I think in the case of brokers, rather than seeing them as someone that isn't an ally, one advice that I got that's worked really well is if a broker is active in an area and is sending you deals that never quite fit, what you can do is exactly like you said, give them the criteria that you want and say, I will give you an LOI. That way, if you need to close a deal with a potential seller to make them interested in selling, here you go. You can say you have a buyer ready to go. This thing is sit on the market for 6 months. And I found that agents have been very, very receptive to that idea. Questions?
On the first couple deals that you syndicated money for family and friends, what were some of the returns that you guys were providing for those few first deals? And then also, what was that conversation like? What type of key metrics were you presenting to them to be able to raise that capital?
Great question. So that moves constantly depending on where you are on the cycle and what equity requires in order to get attracted enough to invest. So in 2015, generally speaking, we were saying we were going to be buying deals at a 5 to 6 cap, renovating them, bringing up to 8 to 9 cap, leveraging them into a 10 to 12% cap return, and then selling them within 5 years for a 17, 18% IRR. We executed on that. That was fund one, delivering 20% IRRs on average. But returns are going down now, so the capital we're raising now, we're dialing that back for the same types of projects, just because the markets are more expensive.
Do you guys look to syndicate each individual deal, or you guys currently have or are considering putting together a fund structure? And so what are the benefits you guys sort of look at and consider going down either path?
We have both. It's a great question. There's pluses and minuses to both. I think the biggest plus, in my opinion, to syndicating deal by deal is that when you sell that deal, you as the sponsor will realize the promote instantly upon sale. That promote is yours. We are operating 2 funds right now. The first fund 1 is winding down. We're 3 or 4 years into it, and we've been selling buildings in fund 1 for the last 2 years. With really excellent results, but we haven't been able to touch the promote because the promote is earned after the whole fund is unwound. So that's a negative to operating the fund. There's certainly lots of positives. You have cash in hand. You raise the fund up front. It's a pool of capital, and then a year later for undefined investments. And then you find those investments, and you don't have to put together materials and convince people to invest in that. You have the money ready to go. So I would say those are the 2 biggest strengths and weaknesses of each structure.
Do you find the back end costs just about the same for a fund versus an individual syndication?
I think the fund's probably more efficient because with individual raises, you're going to put together new documents, new JVs, operating agreements with each investor, legal fees. You have all those transactional costs fresh for every deal you do. Whereas a fund, you're going to do it once. They're going to be big, one-time hit though. So spreading that out over the fund, I think the fund on an expense basis is probably a bit more efficient, but I would focus your priority more on can you afford to wait as long as it takes to wait to realize your share of the profits at the fund level, because it's going to take years as opposed to flipping a deal and taking your 30% of the profit.
I think it's hard. It's hard to raise a fund. At least maybe for us, it's hard to raise a fund. I mean, you need a serious track record. I mean, to give, at least for us, we have a lot of value-add deals. We've got some ground development deals, and each investor, I think, has a certain risk appetite. Value-add, obviously, less risk, less reward. Ground development, the exact opposite. And I think for us, it's been a lot easier to raise money on a one-off basis because I can sit down, I can tell a story about an asset. They can go visit that asset, and then they give me money. In a fund, when you're trying to convince somebody to give you discretionary capital, I mean, at least for us, it's been really challenging. And maybe that's an idea down the road. It's a really good question. And I think, Nick, you pointed out a lot of the pros and cons that are associated with the fund versus raising deals on a one-off basis.
That's absolutely, funds are very uncommon and it's the small level for those reasons. And we face all of those issues. Raising the fund, we get very small allocations of capital from each investor, and then when we do bigger deals, we put the fund into a small piece of that deal, and then raise individual investments from a lot of the same investors, because they can see the deal, understand it, assess the risk on their own, get comfortable with it, and then put in a much more meaningful investment. And that's been our experience in it, for Pete's reasons. People are scared, for good reason, to invest in a fund that they don't know where the money's going to go. I mean, you give them a general outline, this is what we do, and this is what the fund will do, but they can't see the deal in hand. And that's a huge thing, for good reason.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. We have been approached by some new sponsor and young developers that they want to raise a fund, like for example, 10 millions. They talk to us like, how about Fiona, your company invests us like for 3 millions. We do a capital call, and later when we gather all this capital call, we set up a fund. But it took us, I think it's 1 year later, but they called me and said as we dropped this idea. So like for us, we would like to invest like 3 million into a single project instead of fund, because it's just really, really hard.
Chairman Blazer?
Yeah, just a question on if you guys have any advice as to where you should position yourself coming out of grad school to eventually go off on your own, work on deals, any sort of discipline or function or role that you guys would suggest some of us to be focusing on.
What do you think, Fiona?
I think my track is kind of different, but I think my takeaway is like, I come from China and studying here in the United States. A lot of Chinese companies want to step into this market, but they don't have this talent, they don't have networking experience to recruit people in here. So it may be a good chance to find all these companies, maybe through networkings or big conference. They may have give you authority, give you independence to set up a new office in here. And you can have your independence and autonomy at the same time, and you don't need to worry about get money from your own or from family or friends. So I think it's very good path, and I like it very much.
Yeah, I'd probably try to figure out what you want to do, whether it's on the development side, PE side, more analytical, and then I'd probably try to work for a great firm and good people, and I'd try to just build skills. I think skills and knowledge is like the most important thing you could possibly get coming out of school. And if that means sacrificing pay, I would do it. And anything you can to learn those skills. Nick, you mentioned a couple of them earlier.
Yeah, I agree strongly that Pete made the point earlier in the presentation here that real estate isn't the most complicated business in the world, but there are skills that you're not going to just have because you're really smart. You need to acquire them. They're specific to the industry, and I think you need to simply, my advice would be find the best, go and work for the best possible real estate company that you can get your foot into. And spend some time there, and then through that process you'll acquire the skills. You also start getting ideas as to where you think opportunity is. So as the time comes where you're ready to branch out on your own, you're going to be much more focused and honed, and have the skills you need and have ideas about where you want to attack, what property type or what location or whatever else.
So based on the question before, would you recommend to, let's say, one of us starts their own project, would you recommend just even do a deal or project breaking even, or necessarily making money? And
We are specifically, Pete and Fiona and myself, the three of us are specific, and some people shy away from this, but I don't think we should. We're in the business of making money. It is the real estate business, but that is what we do, and if we don't do that successfully, our investors will go away over time eventually. There are a lot of real estate ventures that's not the primary focus. From the public sector, for example, huge infrastructure projects going on in every city. But at the private level, that's
like for the first
what
project,
we do.
just
Yeah.
It's, for the first project, it's incredibly important for you to make money, because if you don't, then it's gonna be crickets. Like, no one's gonna want to work with you, no one's gonna be interested. So I think that anecdote that I gave you about my going to my cousin's birthday party and wedding and all that being really important to me, yes, you need to make sure that first one's really good. That said, you don't have to do something grand. You can buy an apartment building in like East Boston, or not an apartment, like an apartment in East Boston, a single condo unit, and just make that your little project, and then learn everything there, and then grow from that point. Oh, sure. I think we're wrapped up. Right?
Yeah, we're wrapped. Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Sorry. Yeah, we're vacate. Yeah. Thanks.
We need to get in here.
Do you-
Sorry.
Can I just ask
Pressure.
we've got to go. But if you want to take it out into, if you've got some time to stick around, we can go to the chow house and just some seating area.